Okay, here we go.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having me here. Thank you as well to not only the club for having me here, but all the participants who decided to join tonight. I hope you made the right decision. We're actually in for a really good time tonight. I agree with Karen and that I like to do things that are a little bit different. I love working with clubs who are more creative and less rule bound. We're going to talk about that tonight. And I don't know, that is just something that I feel really strongly about is photography is a creative art and sometimes rules just bug me. I'll put it that way, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But a little bit of background in addition to what Karen said. So I live in Scottsdale, Arizona now. I'm originally a Michigan native. I lived there until 2005 before I moved to Arizona. I have been a floral designer, a psychologist for 20 years. I also started my business in photography about 2010. And then I was still working full time as a psychologist and as a consultant around the country. I worked a lot in the Chicagoland area, actually, as a consultant. And so I started my business in 2010, but by 2015 it had grown so much I had to make the difficult choice. Do I keep doing the psychology or do I move full time into photography? Because I couldn't keep up both anymore. Both were becoming more than full-time jobs and I had no life. So I made the choice to move to photography full time and I haven't looked back since. So this is actually, I have been doing this over 10 years now, full time. And about 3 years ago, my now husband, Mason, we've been together for 10 years as well. He came on board full time in the business. And so we now work both for Langell Photography and love it. So I'm going to share my screen real quickly here and we can get going with what I actually want to talk to you guys about. But I want to talk a little about breaking the rules and the hows and the whys. And every rule needs to be thought about, right? A little bit before you break them. Like murder, let's not do that. That's a good rule to keep. But as far as photography goes, there are things that I just feel like I question, the whys. Why are we doing this? What on earth is this rule even for? And so that is what I'm going to talk about tonight. And literally, it's time to break some of these rules and break the mindset around them. But I'm going to give you some reasons why and hopefully some permission too, because sometimes I know we feel a little bit nervous about that. All right. So a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm formerly from Arizona, or excuse me, Michigan, but I live in Arizona now. I have been a birder since I was 8 years old, and I've also had a camera of some type or another in my hand since I was 8 years old. I got my first Canon A1 when I was about 13, and I've been off to the races since with that. Was yearbook photographer, all that. So photography's been in my blood a really long time but professionally the past 15 years. And like I said, I was a floral designer and educational psychologist. But I have to say, birds have changed my life. I wouldn't be here tonight talking to you if it wasn't for birds. I was a birder first and came into photography soon after, and those two things have been intertwined in my life ever since. So I gotta give some hats off to the birds, and we'll talk a little bit about birds tonight. Not a ton, but a little bit. But here's what I value in my own photography. I love creating emotionally evocative photographs. Occasionally I'll shoot, predator prey stuff, but that's not really what I enjoy. I really love things that take your breath away, make you feel something. So that's kind of the way I am. I love breaking rules and boundaries, preserving ethics, but I do love questioning the rules that we have about photography and the why and breaking those rules and boundaries in creative ways. I'm not into the breaking rules like, getting speeding tickets. I've actually never had one. But when it comes to photography, I'm always asking why. Why is this a rule? Why is this something that we need to adhere to? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, in my opinion. I like thinking beyond those traditional conventions. And for me, it helps me develop my creativity and move photography for me into a more creative space. I really don't have limits with what I can do. I believe that the situation dictates the rules. It isn't one set of rules that applies everywhere. It's situational. And so I like to think with that open mind because rules are not universal. And I think, unfortunately, especially with wildlife and nature photography, it feels as though they are, and they're really not. And I like expanding the purpose and utility of our photographs. We're out there using thousands of dollars in gear and traveling to places that cost, anywhere from $10 to, infinity. I want to expand the purpose and utility that we get out of our photographs. And then one thing I love, it's my educational psychology background, but I love teaching and inspiring others on this journey too. I literally, if you said, do you want to go photograph today or do you want to teach today? I'm good with either. I absolutely love both. All right, so our agenda is simple tonight. What rules I want you to think about breaking, how I want you to consider breaking them, and one last very important rule that I suggest you avoid breaking at all costs. Very simple agenda, but we're going to dig into those things as we go along. And then I'll have some questions and discussion at the end. I don't mind, by the way, if you put your questions into the chat window. I will periodically look at it, but most of them I will answer at the end. All right, so let's get started. So it all started here. Rule number 6, deleting bad images. So you all have your chat room in there, and if you wouldn't mind telling me, I have a couple things that I want you to do here. Whoops, did I not share that? There we go. There we go. Hopefully you're seeing that again, that you're seeing my screen. But anyhow, rule number 6, deleting bad images. This is something that I've heard a lot of people talk about over time, is deleting their images and how they store them and how they back them up and all those things. I want to talk about that. The first thing I want to mention with this is I have a question for you, and you can put this in the chat window. Do you delete images as you photograph while the card is in your camera? Go ahead and type a yes or a no or a sometimes or whatever you want. Go ahead and type that in the chat window. Haha, I'm already getting some answers. I see never, no, never, no, capital no, delete in Lightroom, no, 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 not anymore. Sometimes, no, I rarely delete any pics, never, no, I use the computer and look and delete as I go. No, I might miss something, never in camera. Excellent. First of all, I already love this group. You're responsive. Sometimes I do webinars and it's like crickets when I ask questions. So thank you for chiming in and letting me know. So the trend generally in all of your answers is, do I delete images while your your images are still in your camera, while the card is still in the camera? Okay. So then the next question I have for all of you, do you delete images once you transfer them onto your hard drive or computer? How many of you do that? All right, I'm seeing some yeses, lots more yeses, and no. Yes as I go through. Yes, no, yes, possibly years later. I love it. Not often. All right, I'm seeing more mixed results here. 1,000 pics a day with birds is too many to keep. I agree with you, Chuck. That's a lot of images. Um, so it's a little mixed here. Some no, some yes. This isn't an official poll. I guess I could have made it a poll, but it's kind of on the fence, right? I see some yeses and some nos, and the trend isn't super clear here as to whether or not people delete them once they're on their computer. Excellent. Okay, there's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just asking. My third criteria, for those that are deleting in or on the computer or not, whether or not you delete, tell me what your criteria and rationale are for doing so. So if you put yes, that means you delete, and tell me your rationale. If you say no, that means you don't delete anything on your computer. Tell me your rationale. Deborah says no, probably just the bad. Joseph, only if they're out of focus on the computer. Clarence says yes. So if they're out of the focus or the same picture, if they're duplicates and really out of focus, David said no, you never know. Alan, mostly delete duplicate shots. Delete only if the subject's out of focus. There seems to be a theme about the focus here. I see that across a lot of answer. Um, if they're out of focus or it's a burst shot, maybe you're picking the best ones. Duplicates, technology changes, yes. Um, so I think, no, I think I may be able to use them some way, and so on. Excellent. When it's a picture of my hand, I've been there. All right, thank you for that. That's really helpful, and I'll continue to peek at those answers as we go along here. All right, so I want to inform, some people may know this, some people may not, but this is a big rule. Uh, and I think it's something that you need to think about. So deleting the bad images, however bad is according to you. Deleting in camera versus on computer. In camera deleting can corrupt your images. I put your hard drive. I meant your memory card. So anyway, this should say memory card, but look at the picture, that'll tell you. So that can corrupt your images or your memory card. You're going to have problems with that. That comes directly from card manufacturers, best recommendations. And so let me give you an example of what happens. So if we have this grid here, think of your memory card as this grid. And every little, pixel or image gets written into several of these squares. So for example, if that's picture 1, that maybe takes up that many squares. Picture 2 takes up more. Picture 3 takes up more, and so on until your card gradually gets full. Each picture can take up a different number of cells. It's not, equal. Not every image will take up 5 cells, for example. Some might take 12, some might take 2. It just depends, and it goes on and on until you fill your card. By the way, manufacturers have also said, as you get close to filling your card, stop early. Don't shoot until you get that card is full message. That can also be problematic. So stop just short of that if you can. We've all been there when we can't, and you're clicking away and all of a sudden card's full. But if you can keep cognizant that your card is getting close to full and switch it out a little early, that will help as well. So then what do? We sit, we, shoot through a scene, and then we go back and we chimp through our images and, get an idea what they look like, if we need to change anything or whatever. So at that point, a lot of people will go back and delete images out of the card. We have all been there, even me, where I've deleted out of the card because, oh my gosh, my card is full, I'm out of card, and something epic is happening. Been there. But what happens when you delete those things is as you start taking out an image here or there that you don't like, it creates these holes. And this is a very simplified version of what actually happens, but it's a good visual. So all of a sudden you're left with these holes, right? I deleted this picture and that took out these, 12 cells or however many, and so on and so forth. So as you do that, those holes then sit there empty, and then you start shooting again. So then all of a sudden, and I'm using different colors to represent images, you start filling those images up and those holes up, but they don't always fill up perfectly. And so you've got a picture in the case of this red one that's part here, and part over here on the card. And sometimes it leaves little gaps and so on. And then you go to download those images. And that camera card and your computer, it has to like reference where all those pixels were written for all those different pictures. And when they get kind of spread out from each other, it's almost like defragging on a hard drive, if you remember those days, 20 years ago or so when we'd have to defrag. But it kind of can get messed up, and that can cause issues with your card. So I highly recommend in this case not shooting over images that you've deleted and deleting in your computer instead. It will save you from potentially corrupting your card. Some people can do it over and over and over again and never have a problem, but then there's that one time. And so it's just a habit to get into. Just shoot, delete when you get home after you've backed up those images. And so it'll corrupt, if you do that, it'll corrupt your images or hard drive. So download first to your hard drive, back those up, and then delete from your card. And I'm not going to get into all the backup methods. That's like a whole other presentation, but definitely download, backup, and then delete from your card. And when I say delete, it means format your card in camera, not on the computer. Don't just delete the images, but actually format your card in camera. And one thing to know as well is that, and I have pictures of Sony cards here for my Sony A1. Not all cameras are the same, but my Sony A1, when I reformat a card, just one reformat completely wipes out the card entirely. There isn't restore software. You know how you get a card and you get that backup software that you can pull images back off the card, even if they've been, removed and deleted. That is great, but it is not great for Sony A1. I'm not sure if all the Sony cameras format the card in the same way, but the Sony A1, and I suspect the Sony A1 Mark II, now that that's out, does an absolute hard wipe of those cards. There is no getting your data back. So be very certain that you have downloaded your card safely and backed it up onto some other device.
Lisa, are you
Okay.
sharing your screen? Sorry to interrupt, but you're referring to colors and things, and I'm just seeing your face
Yeah,
full screen,
you're seeing my face full
which is
screen.
fine. I just didn't know if you
Um,
were meaning to share something, or
no, so
maybe
you
I'm doing
can't,
something wrong.
hold on, let me see. I stopped sharing. I'll share again. I mean, it literally, I'm only using one computer tonight, so it shouldn't be. Is
You
anybody
okay?
else seeing that?
You're on the wrong tab.
Got it.
You're on the he's on the tab that says meeting. You should switch to the tab that says Lisa Langell's screen at the
Yep,
top of your
got it.
screen.
Yeah, like I said, it could have been a user error. I just never, I haven't seen that before. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. I'm glad we got that straightened out. And it sounds like others are seeing the screen that I have up. So I think it was a one-off kind of situation. So there was a question from Jan of why format in the camera instead of on the computer. Your camera will format that card to serve that camera best. So not that formatting on a computer, it might be fine, but if you format so that it is formatted according to the requirements for that camera, by doing it in camera, it should eliminate any issues for you. Good question, by the way. And then hard drive deletion. It's not as big of a deal to delete things off your hard drive. It's a little bit more capable of handling that. But be really sure you want to delete because as we have started to see with, things like Topaz and Lightroom and different software, there are improvements in what we can do with our images with better software tools, right? We can take out noise. We can make things a little bit sharper in better ways than we've been able to in the past. And goodness knows what we'll be able to do another 5 years from now. So I have, as a personal example, I used to shoot with my Canon 7D, and that camera, I didn't love the ISOs over ISO 400. So I would just opt myself out of situations that were over 400 back in the day. I mean, this is like 10 years ago, but I wouldn't take pictures when they were over ISO 400 because I didn't like the quality after that. And then I got my Canon 7D Mark II and I was like, ooh, I can get up to 800 ISO and still be really happy. And I'm very picky about noise, so my criteria may be more harsh than some, but I just wouldn't shoot things that were over 800 typically, once in a while, but not a lot. And now with the advent of, Lightroom and Nik and Topaz and all these other tools that can denoise your pictures, I am really regretting the 10 years ago when I had some epic moments and I didn't shoot them because of the noise, and it was my own criteria. And there's many more things that'll probably come out in the future that we can play with and explore those images in ways that you're not thinking about right now. So I personally don't ever delete anything, even if it's crap. And for me as an instructor, sometimes I need those crap images to use as examples of what to do and not to do and so forth. So I sometimes look at my old images as a treasure trove of teaching experiences for people. So there's that. But you can recover poor images better than you ever could before. You can reduce the noise. You can apply future learning and creative techniques to images that you can't imagine using today because you don't have the idea yet, right? We're creatives, we're iterative, and you don't know that something 3 years from now that you're going to learn about, think about, want to experiment with, and you might have the perfect image in your archives to do that with. But if you delete them all, you have issues. So use that to your own level of desire. I'm not forcing you to do any of it. I just want you to think about it because sometimes we get hard set in the way we do things, and storage is cheap anymore. And I'd way rather have those images as potential. Sometimes you go back years later and you see that image differently. You were disappointed in it at the time because you wanted something that, I don't know, had more pink and orange in the sky. And then you see it 3 years later and you're like, oh, I completely can reconceive this image and do something else with it. So give yourself that freedom to do, in my opinion. All right, so we do want to break that rule. And here's a good example. This was a saguaro cactus in Arizona. This is the raw image shot on a sunny, hazy day in Arizona. The light was awful. It was a blue sky day. I overexposed it. It's hazy. It's nothing good, right? I would never be excited about this image. But I came back to it a long while later, and I really think deleting bad images is a bad idea. And here's an example. So taking that image, and by the way, look at, I still have some of the detail here, but it's blown out. I mean, this image just kind of sucks in a traditional sense. But if I take that image and I select the subject, I increase dehaze a little bit, give it even more haze, increase the texture, increase the contrast. I grabbed a new mask, it was a brush, and I applied some contrast, dehaze, and texture to this image. This is the before. And I also touched on some plants in the ground to bring out a bit more darkness and texture. And after that, I then got this. So that's the before with all of those steps. This is the after. So it got a little bit more crunchy looking, if you will, a little bit better definition. And then that's the before and that's the after zoomed in. So then I took that image and I went and added a texture. So this is a texture that I have from, I don't know where I got it or photographed it or whatnot, but there it is. And I overlaid that texture on that image and it looks beautiful. I love it. I would print it and put it on my wall right now if I had more space on my wall. But so simple. It totally fits the image and it really needed that hazy, icky sky and like this gritty, harsh cactus in the hot sun. I mean, this speaks of Arizona in the heat so much to me. But it's a really neat way to take that image that was bad and make it good. And so there are lots of creative things that you can do with your images, but I just want to say if I deleted it, I could have come up with this. And that's what I'm talking about is there's a lot of creativity in there that you might be deleting out in the process. All right. So, rule number 5. So we got through 6. Let's get to 5 here. Some of these rules take longer than others. And if you have comments, put them in the chat window and I'll be glad to address them. All right. So rule number 5, using standard aspect ratios for wildlife. So our cameras come out of the box with an aspect ratio, 4:3 or what have you. And we constantly use that. I see images framed up in that, especially wildlife, all the time. I'm a wildlife shooter primarily. My alter ego is cowboys, and then I do a little bit of portraiture too. So using standard aspect ratios. So here's a little bit of a little history and a little trivia for you. So how did we start using 4:3 aspect ratio? And you don't have to type this in the chat window. I just want you to think about whether or not you know the answer to this. How did we start using 4:3, which is a common aspect ratio? And if we start looking at it, here's a couple of examples of 4:3. And Jack, this is a picture in Michigan. All right, so 4:3 came from this. And what is that? Well, it's 35 millimeter film. And what that is in the late 1890s, William Kennedy Dixon, an employee of Thomas Edison, was developing a forerunner to the movie projector. And he decided that 4 perforations, those 4 little holes on 35 millimeter film, gave the ideal shape. And that became the standard for film and TV for decades. Currently, we are more into the 16:9 aspect ratio, but it wasn't until recently that we moved away from 4:3. And I say recently, within the past 10 to 20 years. All right. So these little perforations, this is your film, and it created that 4:3, and that was a very traditional aspect ratio. So if we play a little bit more history here, how do we start using 4:5? Another common aspect ratio. Well, 4:5s, here's a picture that shows you that example, are very commonly seen in 8:10 or 16:20 and so forth picture frames. But that was from large format film. So that was the aspect ratio in the day for large format photographs from large format cameras. And it also translates to the standard trim size for many magazines, because if you're taking a picture and it goes in a magazine, like the magazine kind of needs to fit that aspect ratio. There's a few other reasons that gets into paper size and how paper is basically cut, but the magazines use that standard format a lot. And then taking that a little further, a little more history and trivia. And by the way, you were asking me how I use AI in my pictures. I don't use AI uh, in my own work, but in a presentation, I'll gladly do so. And this was an AI image that I created using Midjourney. So anyway, I do occasionally use AI, but not in my own photographs. All right, so where else is 4:5 used? Well, early film. Early photographic film came in sheets, often in sizes like 16:20. So these were native sizes that were commonly used. And the larger sheets would sometimes be cut down to create smaller formats like 8:10 and 4:5. So we use those for magazines. And, it just kind of translate these standard sizes go into magazines quite often. And even more history, 3:2 format. You remember, and here's an example of a 3:2, but you remember this 35 millimeter film. Well, if we took that film, put it side by side, and then we merged them together, that ends up becoming that standard size, and that is the size that we typically use now as 3:2 for most landscapes. And surprise, it gets to be in the 2-page spreads for magazines quite often. There you go. So you can see the history play out here and how these sizes that we use today in our standard aspect ratios in our cameras and magazines and so forth, it all comes back from early history. And, we want to use the whole frame, so we print the whole frame, and that's how you get these standard sizes. And interestingly enough, this plays into a lot of our rules in competitions and so forth. Um, some cropping is allowed, but a lot of people want that standard aspect ratio that you typically see in magazines. I'm just showing you a few that have been published in the front cover, right? 2-page spreads, we see that a lot. That's the 3:2. All of this kind of fits. And occasionally you'll see something else, but these are very standard and very commonly printed. If there's a reason why our frames are done in, 8:10, 16:20, and so forth. You're starting to see a little bit more variation with the square aspect ratios and things, but the frames, you still go to the store. It's very hard even to find an 8:12 frame, which would be our aspect ratio in crop sensor cameras, certain crop sensor cameras. But they're still hard to find. It's still the 8:10 that we commonly see. So if that's a little history for you and how that all works, those aspect ratios allowed for efficient printing of photos. You didn't waste paper, and they became the industry standard. And they were the most practical way to cut paper, and it just, like I said, was efficient. So when we look at those, let me just skip through here again. Here's a couple of traditional aspect ratios in real print. Here's 4:5. This is what this looks like. And then here's 4:3. Here's 3:2. And then 16:9, which is a newer aspect ratio. I don't see cameras shooting in that, but I do see cameras that will allow you to change the crop factor to that in camera, or at least it will give you the look of a 16:9 until you download it, and then it's usually in its original aspect ratio, but it helps you crop if you want to kind of frame up and crop in those alternative aspect ratios. All right, so there's the different sizes. This is the only one that's kind of a newer thing we've seen lately. Unless you go back way back into, the 50s or so, you would see squares. Polaroids, you would see squares. I didn't include that because we all know what a square looks like. All right, so why do we want to do that for standard film or sensor sizes? Well, it was the magazine trim size, the standard frame sizes, and so forth. So I've kind of, hit that well, but you get the idea. So when we do this, this is a rule I really want you to break. This is not a complicated rule, but I really want you to start thinking about this differently than you have in the past. Most all of us go out into the field and we point our camera at something, we zoom in or out or walk closer or further away, and then we take the picture as it is. And I just need you to break that. There are more places beyond magazines and calendars and social media for your photography to live today. Those aspect ratios, like I said, were dictated for magazines and calendars, or magazines and calendars basically adhered to that standard. But I don't shoot that way anymore. I don't shoot so that my picture goes from edge to edge. I'm not talking about a little cropping for, to get closer to something. I'm talking about literally visualizing the image in an alternate aspect ratio. And so here's a good example of why we should consider this is web banners, advertising, interior decor, fine art, and product art use all kinds of different aspect ratios. We're not stuck in the box with 8:10 and 11:14 anymore. We can do all kinds of things. This picture was done approximately 10:25. This is an 8-foot long metal print on a wall. They don't have they were going to put a big TV here. This is a conference room in a lawyer's office, but this is an 8-foot wide metal print. This is definitely not the standard aspect ratio, and if I did, it would cover the whole wall and it would look kind of really dumb. So this wide pano style crop, this is I think a 2 or 3 image pano. I'd have to go back and look. 2 or 3 image pano worked perfectly in this case, but a lot of people don't think about the pano aspect. Here's a very simple image, a fall colored tree in Arizona on a rainy day. I'm not saying it's the world's best image. It's just an example. When I would go out and think about how I want this to look on the wall as opposed to just out of the camera. Here's the picture, but this is actually what I'm framing up, right? So this is a 10:20 aspect ratio. This is what I want. I'm ignoring all of this down here, but in my mind, I'm thinking about this going into the shot. How do I want to frame it up? What do I want this to look like as an outcome? And I leave extra space and I zoom, pull back a little bit, go wider so that I can have that extra space so I can crop it as a wide aspect ratio. But I don't see too many people going out there and thinking ahead of time that they're going to crop for a certain aspect ratio going into that shot and leaving room accordingly. So this is actually, it was 10:22, my bad. So this is what it looks like as a 10:22. And you can see it looks so much better like that than like, this or looking at that. This is like tons of foreground and it's a little like lopsided, if you will. This just looks so much better. Or this is a 10:22 loon, a red-throated loon in Alaska. I do a ton of work in Alaska, 8 workshops a year in Alaska. And so I get to photograph birds a lot, and this is one of my favorites. So this is 10:22. It works for that bird perfectly, but most people don't think about it. And they'll zoom in much closer and maybe get the head, or maybe they'll crop and just, crop certain things, but really thinking ahead of what aspect ratios you can use are great. Here's another 10:22. This just gives you an example of 3 different images. This is a panning style image of sandhill cranes and Bosque del Apache in Socorro, New Mexico area. 10:22. I love it. and that looks beautiful on the wall. And the reason why I'm always thinking in wide aspect ratio panos and verticals, we'll come to that too, is because they work so well for interiors. If you take our traditional 4x5, even 3x2 aspect ratio and blow it up big enough to go across this dining room table, or a living room sofa, or a foyer, or a master bedroom, or what have you, it's going to be so tall by the time it's done. It's going to overwhelm the room. So I'm always thinking in terms of wide aspect ratio panos. Here's an example here. This is a 10x20. This picture was certainly taller than that, but I cropped it as a 10x20. Here's a 28x10, and you're thinking, well, why would I want so much negative space? Well, when you put it in a space like that, it works really well. Simple minimalism, tons of vertical space works really well in an office, ties in those office colors. All right, so rule number 4, we're getting through them here. So avoiding too much negative space. I have heard so many times, I've judged a ton of camera club competitions, photo contests, and so forth. And so often I have heard judges say, well, that has too much negative space. Okay, well, what does that mean? And how is that, is that relative or is that an absolute? This rule is one I really wish people would break, avoiding too much negative space. Negative space can be so stunning, but you got to understand it has to go in the right place and the right time. So let's talk about that a little bit. So here's a magazine. We've talked about magazines before, and I just fabricated this to show you an example. But a magazine, when you pick it up, it's already small. We need pictures. Even a picture that is like 2/3 the size of the frame still looks small on this page. The left is an actual publication. On the right, I put an example. If we have wildlife images that are really tiny in a magazine with 10 tons of print, it looks silly. It looks hard to read. You're never going to pick up that picture and have it feel like the magazine's jumping off the page. There's a reason why your photography rules often include things like, especially for wildlife, really has to fill the frame. I want to see vibrant colors. I want to see feather detail, sharp focus, action, all those things, because it makes people pick up the magazine and want to read it. Like if you saw a picture of something really cool and heavy action on the front cover, like a bear catching a salmon or whatever, you're going to more likely want to pick that up and take a look at it. And that is full frame in that magazine. Whereas, these little pictures here, it just like, it isn't worth anything. It's not going to make you want to pick it up. And so magazine requirements have dictated those intense images. I want to see lots of color. I want to see scarlet macaws and rainbows and, vibrant colors of things and close up, fill the frame, sharp action, all that stuff I just mentioned. Small subjects and small photos or small articles, in the magazine, they just get lost in that page, and it isn't something very compelling for people to want to pick up and read. So we have tended in wildlife, like I said, to go full frame and really try to fill that frame with subject, intense, stuff, the action, the interaction, the behaviors, all of that stuff. It's just fun. I mean, it's a lovely way to photograph. I'm not saying this is wrong, but when you're thinking about where else it's going to live, this can sometimes fall short. So again, I will fill the frame when I want to and need to, but I often give myself options. Fill the frame, then more negative space. I'll go vertical and horizontal and play with things in different ways, assuming I have the moment is there long enough to give me the option to do that. But those are the things I do. I don't need, especially if I'm hanging it on the wall, I don't need an eagle this big, because if I blow it up to a, I don't know, a 24x36 or, whatever size, I don't need a massive eagle on my wall. That's a little intimidating. So I have to think about where it's going to live. In a magazine, this would be great. In a lobby, this would be a little intimidating. So we got to think about that, right? Here's full frame as well. Super sweet. I get to see the little details in the chicks. That's great for magazines, not great for everything else. So the full frame, the color, the vibrant, the focus, the texture, all those things, wonderful things. But I want you to think in addition to this style. So we got to break that rule. And avoiding too much negative space, I really think that needs to go away because it's situational. Not saying always, and I'm not saying never. I'm saying use it with a vision. So I want you to revise your thinking. So this image with negative space, there's a lot of space going on up here. I could crop it, but I don't necessarily want to because I could take this image, I could crop it, like I said, but what if I wanted to do this and really fill that wall and just color block? And it's very simple color, right? This blue-gray tone. Very simple feel, works really well in a bedroom, very peaceful, pulls in some of those gray tones, kind of those warm and cool gray tones. But that's it. I love this feeling of space, of clean, of simple, but yet it's still color blocks. If I only cropped it right in here, this would be a great big huge wall that would feel empty. Having this space in this vaulted ceiling works really well without making it being cluttery. The whole thing looks more cohesive. All the little decor, the bed, everything works together. In this case, it doesn't overwhelm, but it can in the wrong space. Here's another example in a lobby. This in this nice this column here. This is beautiful. It gives height here. We can afford to have that height. So I don't need to crop in a wide aspect ratio like I was talking about before, but it's simple. It's not cluttery. If there was a picture of, you know, a bear and flowers and all this stuff in here, it'd be like way too much for this particular environment. Here's another one. This is a captive owl, and you can still see the Jessies here, but it was captured in the fog. I left a lot of negative space. You could even go whole hog with the negative space and do something like that if you just want something simple, especially if you have, and I don't have a picture of this here, but if you have like a table with a plant or two in front of it that you wanted to put over here, it would be beautiful. You can put the table right here, have plants growing up. It doesn't conflict with the picture. It just supports it and adds layer to your room. As a little bit of background, I was a floral designer for 15 years, and I also worked with a lot of interior designers because I decorated using a lot of florals, permanent pieces for very high-end homes. So we'd make big pieces, you know, 6, 8 feet wide or tall sometimes that would go on the wall as permanent pieces. I was designing those, and I'd work closely with interior designers to understand the room, the design of the room, how we're going to hang art on the wall, how the furniture is going to go, the color palette, all those things. And so I now integrate a lot of that into my photography. So here's a panel of that same image, but this negative space isn't a problem. It doesn't detract from this gorgeous wall. If I had a ton of things filling the frame in here, you know, a flock of birds or, you know, I'm trying to think of something that would be long, an alligator, I don't know, but it would just really take away from this lovely texture in the wall. So I love the simplicity here in the negative space. Here's another one, negative space and a high key image of, I think it's a yucca, and this was on a beach in Florida. And no, this isn't cut out and stuck on a white background. This is the image done in a high key style and in camera, and there you go. So that works super well in this room. We're tying in the creamy beige color, the white, and the green. All right, here's another one. This is my favorite tree in Yellowstone National Park, and it's really hard to photograph because it's up in a weird hill, and you literally can't stop anywhere on the road at that point to photograph it. So I did it once. I had someone drop me off, and it was a little bit sketchy, but I got a photo of it. Really pretty tree. I love the shape and kind of how it mushrooms. But there it is in high key. That is how I photographed it. I'll talk a little bit about high key in a minute. But there it is with negative space. And now I am positive that in a photo contest, that would be frowned upon. We'd be like, what is all that? That's too small in the frame. There's too much negative space, and I'd get dinged. And I keep saying to people, it depends on where it's going to live, right? It needs to live somewhere. It's like if you had a spice, I don't know, ginger, and you had ginger and you ate it on its own. It's like, oh my God, this is terrible. But you put ginger and incorporate it into something, and it's phenomenal. And that's how I see photographs. How are you incorporating them into their environment? And that's really what's going to make them shine or not. So if I put this image here, it looks stunning. So that's what I'm talking about too much negative space. In a competition, they ding you. And that is why I have a love-hate relationship with competition. I've judged a ton and I'm always happy to do it. But I always go, yes, but the rules that we engage in are wildlife and calendar based rules. The magazines and calendars. They are not what's going to work well in a home. In fact, often those compete with one another. But we're often trained in one way to do wildlife photography and these rules, and it has to be this thing. And it's like no one's ever questioned, well, where did those rules come from? And why are we only using that set of rules? To me, the requirements of the situation should dictate how the photograph is created. What size, what shape, how much post-processing or not, what colors, all of those things. It is really dictated by where it's going to live. And in traditional magazine and calendar photography, the pictures live in isolation, right? You enter a competition and people are looking at that picture with a blank background, usually black, gray, or white, and it really has no influence on the picture. Whereas I think of things of this picture and where's it going to live? And if I want to live in a living room or a bathroom or an office or lobby or a magazine or a banner or in some kind of advertisement or whatever, all of them have different rules for the place it's going to live. And that's how I think a lot about images. Here's another negative space. Birds, when we fill the frame, we blow those guys and put them on the wall. You blow them up large and they look scary. It's too much. Like you don't want a 4-foot warbler on your wall in your living room. So if we can take that still big, but notice how it keeps a little bit of the perspective. It's smaller in the frame and this big picture fills that space in that room. Beautiful. I love that. But a judge might ding me on that picture because the bird is too small in the frame. And also that it's done in high key with the white background, which is another thing that freaks a lot of people out. We'll talk about that in a minute. So rule number 3, your histogram should show a mountain in the middle. I've taught a lot of photography over the years. I love doing that. And so many times people have come to me and say, well, I'm trying to photograph this, but I can't get my histogram right. And that's not a bad question. But their definition of right or correct is making sure that that histogram has a mountain in the middle. And what do I mean by that? If you're not familiar with histograms, histograms are just a fancy word for a bar graph. It has 256 bars in it. And those bars go from, if you look at my picture here, the leftmost ones are the darkest. The rightmost ones in this rectangle are the lightest. And it represents how many pixels in each of 256 buckets from dark to light are in your image. So it's a counter basically. So I can look at this image here without even looking at the picture and I can say, well, there's not a ton of really dark stuff. There's a lot of darker things. There's a lot of midtones. And then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of whites or light color in a really small range, but very little or no pure white. So it doesn't tell you what the picture is, but it tells you how many things there are. So are there any darks and blacks in here? Not really, other than maybe the camera. And then I go into the darker things. Yes, there's darker things. There's darker green grasses in the reflection. There's some darker areas here, maybe some really dark areas of the grass here, maybe her hat or the wrinkles in her sweatshirt. Okay, then we get into some midtones here. Yes, tons of midtones. The greens in here and the grasses and the hill. There's some midtones in the grays here. Maybe some in the darker sky that's reflecting in the water. And then the lighter tones. Yes, all the sky and the lighter part of the water here and the lighter part of those mountains. And then we get into the whites. There's no pure whites here, but there's a blip here that says there's some really white or light colored something, and that's going to be the snow. So that's a read on your picture. And then if you want to do it by color, you can do that as well. I'm not going to get into a histogram lesson tonight. I just want to explain that in case there's folks in the room who've never seen one or understand what it is, even if you have seen it. So it's a reading. It's telling you what your camera caught. Are you happy with that or not? And a lot of times, the histogram, the photography instructors of the world will say, you really want to, not clip your black blacks and not clip your whites. And what that means is you don't want these things to look like they've been cut off at the pure blacks or the pure whites, that your picture has a ton of pure black or a ton of pure white. You don't want to do that. And that's true to a point, but it is certainly a not an always thing. Yet I have people all the time who come and are like, I'm trying to get my histogram correct and it's not correct. And I'm like, there may be a reason for that. So this is a rule, a habit, a saying, something you need to adhere to that I highly disagree about. We want to shoot the mountain in the middle when it makes sense to keep, and they say mountain in the middle. I don't mean the mountain in my picture, the mountain that is created in your histogram. This looks like a jagged mountain. All right. So, and we do it over and over again. Here's a picture of the Teton, same kind of thing. Why? Well, that has always been considered the perfect exposure. And perfect is a relative term. Perfect is what do you envision for it, and does it look like what you want, not necessarily what the camera wants, or the leader or instructor or what have you. Um, the mountain in the middle makes sure that you don't overexpose your highlights or your shadows, and that can be a very good thing. I'm not poo-pooing it. For example, in this here, we have some darker shadows, but I haven't blown anything out and I haven't made anything pure black in here. There are some really dark tones, but that was the mood of the day. But the histogram still fits within the edges. It doesn't bump up against this side or this side. That would be technically considered great by many people. And I would think that's great for this image too. There's a little bigger histogram, 256 of those little bars. But when we start looking at things where it's not fitting that histogram, times to adhere to the histogram rules, yes, there are times, but there's times when we don't want to either. The times when we do is, here's a picture of a flower and you can see all these little petals being blown out, meaning that they're pure white in here, and it just looks garish. It looks like I need to put sunglasses on. And that's where we're clipping, because it looks like literally somebody took a scissors and cut this off. It's clipping the highlights and clipping the shadows. And not only in the lightness and darkness, but even in the red channel. And when you get too close to clipping something, the saturation starts to go away, it starts to get higher, and the detail starts to go away, and you will lose your detail in images the more and more close that color gets to the right-hand side or the left. So here's an example here of this little blue heron that was immature, so it's white at the moment. But here's the histogram for that, and we're starting to get close to clipping these highlights. You can see this is really bright, there's no detail there. This is really bright, there's no detail there, unlike the detail that you see here. And a lot of people miss that. They won't know to underexpose that and bring that detail in. But if you do underexpose it, you're going to see that you have much more detail here in that picture. That's another good time to use your histogram and not clip your whites, for example, because you want to see that feather detail, or you'll get dinged for a picture like this. You'll definitely get dinged in judging. Okay, but we still want to break the rule. We want to have the freedom. There's a purpose to a rule, and we want to know how we can break them and when we should. And in this case, times to never adhere to the histogram rules. And these are where I often like to live, unfortunately or fortunately. I always love to live in the corners of photography and the unusual stuff. But all right, this always shoot the mountain in the middle. That's a great rule, except in a silhouette. So silhouettes, you want black or nearly black in your darkest parts of the image. And then you have highlights, and then you have perhaps even a spike. This is your sun, but you need these valleys in here to create the what do I say, the dynamic between the dark and the lighter tones. So this is the valley. Now this is a darker valley. We have the really dark stuff, and then this represents a lot of that sky, which is more of a darker midtone in this case. But that was what I wanted for that image. So that's okay. It's okay to get really near black. And it's okay to clip a little bit of the lights or close to it because it's the sun. Here's one here. Here's another much more wide valley. I don't have a mountain at all, and I don't want one. At least not the traditional one. I want one that looks more like this. Here's where your blacks are in the silhouette. And then there's some darker tones in there. It's probably these darker clouds and maybe something that's not quite black in here. And then there's very little else until we start getting into the lighter midtones and up into the brighter tones of that image. But if you tried to create a normal mountain in here, which is what some people literally are trying to look for because they've been told you want the mountain in the middle, no, you don't. Not always. Sometimes, but not always. And you got to understand the histogram is a living, breathing thing that is a reflection of what you want for your image. And if you're not getting what you want, then you need to adjust something. It isn't that it should only look this way. And that, unfortunately, especially for newer photographers, is something that they took too literally, and it was explained to them maybe in a certain situation, or somebody literally has said to them, always do this or always do that. There's never an always and a never. Everything is nuanced. So we don't always want to shoot with that mountain in the middle. Same with high key images. So here's the histogram for high key. But if somebody showed you that histogram alone and said, hey, I shot this picture with this histogram, they'd think you were wackadoo. They would not want that picture until you match it up with something in high key like this. And a high key photo to me is not something that is cut out from another photo and stuck on a white background. In fact, that looks hideous. I do high key in camera, very specific circumstances. We'll have to do that class on another day, but it is a look I love doing, and it is an in-camera look minus very limited processing at the end, just like we do with any of our images, slight contrast adjustments or whatever. But it is definitely not, cutting something out or, removing the background and inserting another background, anything even remotely like that. But the high key does look unique. So here's two eagles with some kelp on a beach, a little bit of reflection. Here's the histogram for that. And notice all the white and near white tones. There's a little bit of darker stuff for the eagles and virtually no black. Here's low key, right? The opposite of high key. This is other than in black and white, and I toned down the reflection a little bit. This is in camera of a bird in full sun later in the day in Florida with mangroves behind it. You expose for the white bird in the bright sun. The mangroves, which are much darker, go completely black. So again, in my histogram, this is what it looks like. It's the opposite of high key. And I do want those shadows clipped because I want this pure black. That's what I'm going for, and that's what I want. But again, if you follow the traditional rule, it's not going to work for you. You're going to struggle to try to get the look you're going for because you're going to literally be trying to expose for something in complete competition with the look that you're actually going for, which in this case was a low key look. Here's another one. And here's the histogram for that. Very odd histogram, by most wildlife and nature kind of photos. All right. Rule number 2, never photograph birds against a white or gray sky. I remember when I was, oh my gosh, probably 14, 15, I was at a place called Point Pelee National Park in Canada, and I was photographing birds. And I was just kind of getting into the little bit more advanced levels of photography. I didn't have anything beyond, I think, my 70 to 200 Vivitar lens at the time, which doesn't pull things in very well, but is what I had. And so anyway, I was shooting with that. And I remember this gentleman standing next to me, quite a bit older than me at the time, and I was pointing at some bird, and he's like, never shoot birds against a white sky. And I was like, oh, I'm like, that never even occurred to me. I see a bird, it's in the open, I shoot it, and apparently I was shooting it on a gray or cloudy day, and it just, he's like, it won't ever look good. I'm like, okay. So I never shot birds against a gray sky for a very long time. I wish I did, but I wish I knew now, then, or wish I knew then what I know now is what I'm trying to say. So when we have pictures like this, here's the white sky, which is actually, it almost looks more blue-gray because it was a stormy day. And those pictures tend to look underexposed because there's so much light color in the sky and your camera wants to expose for that sky because there's a lot more sky color in here than there is bird color. And so your camera on evaluative metering will underexpose it. Many of you know this by now. But this used to be a no, and this is something I now look for. This is like ideal circumstances for me to look for. And so I say yes, photograph birds against a white sky, and here's why. First of all, the images, well, most people have said not to do it because of these reasons. Why? Well, the images often look flat or underexposed. That is the logic of why you shouldn't do this. The images don't pop, right? They're considered to be more poor or amateur techniques, like you don't know better kind of stuff. They lack color, contrast, vibrance, and all of that has been very important for magazines to make those images jump off the page. So they've always recommended something like this. So this background is of a red brick lighthouse in Michigan with a bunch filtered through a bunch of trees and leaves, but that red still came through. Or this one here, it's not a white background. It's not a, gray sky background. It's more pine trees and brush and things behind this Perula warbler. Or this one here. This is actually at my hummingbird workshops where we use handmade backgrounds, but this was the background to mimic a field of flowers and trees. Or this one here, just a desert background for this cactus wren. But again, not on white skies, not on gray skies. And of course, you have your trusty blue sky you can use with these eagles from Alaska. Or this one here, this is more of that sunset view with these herons. So all of those, oh, can we
I
maybe,
muted them.
okay, thanks. All right. So I want to break you out of that habit too, and that notion. And I know this is kind of anti-photography rules for competitions. If you're entering competition, you have to know the rules of the game going in. They often don't like these other things. But if you want to participate in photography in the rest of the world outside of those environments where we're competing, where we're entering in magazines or in calendars, there's plenty of other places for our photography. And these are things you need to free yourself up from and realize that they are situational rules. They are not universal rules for what makes good or bad wildlife photography or nature photography. So we need to break that rule. And in this case, why? Well, I want to introduce more creativity when images are properly exposed. I want you to see something different. I want your images to not just live in magazines, because frankly, magazines are a dying art. They're beautiful, but there's not nearly as many. Think about it. When we used to take images, it was to get them into magazines and calendars. We were always so proud when we got an image into a magazine or calendar. Well, now magazines, like 90% of them, I'm using that as a really ballpark number, have went away. And there's not that same payoff that there used to be. You used to get good money for that. And I will say the last major magazine that I even submitted for was Outdoor Photographer back in, I don't know, 2019, 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. And it was a multi-page spread with a front cover and a 2,000 word article that I had to write. And all of that together, I don't know how many images were in there, multiple. The whole thing paid $1,600 and that's before tax. So it's really not that lucrative. And so I always am looking at other ways that I can use my photography that I love to do for something beyond magazines and calendars. But the funny thing is, you have to be ready for people to look at it and go, well, that's not right. And, when I put something out there, I don't always expect to have people think it's correct, but they're not thinking the way I'm thinking about pushing into new places and boundaries. And I want my art to be in more places than just in a magazine that they're going away. So that's my logic behind all of this is photography is amazing. Let's get nature into people's homes and lobbies and other places, advertisements, online, Facebook banners, all the other places that we don't ever hear any organization talking about the rules for. And that's what I like to do is there are other sets of rules. They're just not very well known. All right. So, going with that a little bit further, I love using crappy light because I don't get, surprisingly, as a full-time photographer, I do not get the chance to photograph for myself all that often. I am either leading workshops and shooting, or I come back home and I'm working on the computer, getting something ready for the next thing I'm doing. So I don't get a lot of days to just go out and play. And if I do, I don't always want people around. I want to be thinking in my head and creating and contemplating things, and I don't want to be interrupted. If I have a crappy weather day, well, a lot of people would just hang it up and not bother shooting. You know, if you don't have magic hour, you don't have much. I would take a cloudy, hazy, rainy, dreary day over a full sun day anytime. I love it. It just does all the things I want to do with that light. So I can use that crappy light really well. And I can maximize my opportunity to photograph in a variety of conditions, which makes me a better photographer. And it also makes me a better leader because I can tell people how to utilize this light and that light and the other kind of light. And we're not kind of handcuffed with having quote unquote the wrong light for the photography that we're doing. I mean, certain things you need clear skies to do, you know, Milky Way photography. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about more the traditional wildlife and nature. All right, so if you took an image like this would probably get dinged in a competition. Doesn't look like a competition image. It's small in the frame. We've kind of covered a lot of the things around this already. But in a high key scenario, this would be correct. It uses abnormally, and I say bright light, meaning bright exposures, overexposing quite a bit. It washes out most of the shadows and detail in an image. So for example, this is your histogram for that image. There's virtually no shadow. There's a tiny little bit. There's a little bit of light on this. Usually I go for no side light or front light or anything, but there's a tiny bit in this. I can live with that. But you can see your shadows, midtones, and highlights. Most of what you have here are midtones and highlights. So for example, if I'm shooting, there is a immature black crowned night heron hanging in this branch right here, and I'm trying to photograph it in high key. This is in Arizona where it rarely gets cloudy. So I'm always grateful if we have an overcast day in Arizona. Bonus points if I can actually go out and shoot in it. But I am getting my settings ready and photographing that bird. And what the camera is seeing is something more like this. Notice this bird, it's underexposed because my camera is exposing for so much of this white. And if there weren't this many leaves in here, this would be almost a silhouette. These darker greens make my camera expose a little lighter than it normally would, but I still need to push that quite a bit further. So I'm waiting for this bird to do something interesting, and I'm overexposing, in this case, between 2 and 3 full stops overexposed. And then what I get, I can adjust my white balance, and then I get something like this, which is a pure white sky with a beautiful bird in it and a nice high key style image. And here's a few more just to give you an idea. This is a alder flycatcher. I think you know what that is. A coastal brown bear, eagle, hummingbird. We even do high key in my hummingbird workshops. Couple of eagles chasing one another. This is on a gray sky, you know, kind of a yucky day, what many people would think. And I'm always really excited when we get these days because we can do stuff like that. There's an owl that's down the street from my house. And no, these are not cut out and put on backgrounds. These are in camera with slight tweaking in post. No more, no less than you'd normally do. You know, a little color, contrast, whatever you need. Remove some dust spots, but these are not highly processed images, contrary to what many believe. And my last rule, and it's a short and sweet one. Wildlife photography, well, it's not super short, but it is awful sweet. Wildlife photography doesn't sell in interiors. This I've heard so many times, and Karen, I think you've had me present a little bit about this in the past, but this is a misnomer. But there's a reason wildlife photography doesn't typically sell in interiors in the way that we create it. It's just the wrong fit. It's like putting mustard on a donut. Like it's just two great things totally don't work together. So I'll talk about this and how we can change it. Wildlife photography doesn't sell in interiors. This is an ICM, or excuse me, panning style image in an interior. They do sell, but you have to understand the mentality of getting things into an interior. But why is this so commonly said? And I hear it everywhere. People are like, my images that have won awards and this and that, they never sell. I try to put them up for sale in a fair or festival or online and nobody buys them. And I can relate. I had that problem too. Most people have little success in selling them. That's why this kind of, it's not really a rule, but it's a very common accepted fact, if you will. Photography rules are for the wrong market. That is true. And people are not thinking like a consumer of art for their home interior. So keeping in mind with that, I'm going to show you a few interiors. So this one, very simple color palette. We have basically warm tones, all in a spectrum of everything from beigey cream to tan. Maybe the green leaves are a little bit of something different, but everything is neutral toned in here. Here's another one. Look at the color palette here. We have some gray, we have a little bit of kind of tan and beige, white. It's basically grays and whites and blacks and tans, like very simple color palette. If you look at color harmony at all or study color harmony and color theory, you'll start to understand what they're pulling from here, but it's very simple. Here's a very colorful one, but I rarely see this kind of color in a room. This is awesome. But wow, very carefully chosen colors and designs. And the sofa and chair are really colorful. The picture on the wall is really colorful. Everything else is very neutral. Neutral carpet, neutral walls, everything else is neutral. All right. So here's one in greens with a little punch of pink, complementary colors on the color wheel, pink and green. And those work really well, but the room is very carefully designed with those colors in mind. You don't see, some red and some purple and some beige and a gray carpet. And, it is simple, simple, very simple. And this one here, we have this beautiful kind of mauvey pink color. The pictures on the wall are all monochromatic in that color tone or color family. Everything's very simply chosen. And what I find in wildlife photography is all of our rules conflict with that. So the rule of having impact, right? Picture has to have impact and jump off the wall. It's like, I don't even, it works color-wise, but I don't want that on my wall. That's scary. So that's probably a no, it doesn't work. And if we have things, again, impact, this does have impact. It's a silhouette, it's beautiful, 2 sandhill cranes, the color's gorgeous. Would it work in a room? Maybe. I feel like this is still really strong of a color for this room, but the room does have a very simple color palette. Maybe you could get away with it. It's a big maybe though, and I'd probably want to mute those colors a little bit. So that's a maybe. Capture the action. We're told to do that all the time in wildlife photography. First of all, a lot of people will say, your images are cropped too much or not enough or whatever. This is cropped pretty tightly, but this whole scene just doesn't work in this room. I mean, perhaps if you had a beach house in Florida and you were right on the ocean and your color palette was very simple, it might work. But sometimes all of this realism is just a little too much visually for this space. And the photographs kind of are too strong, if you will, for the palette of the room. So that doesn't typically work. Here's another when I say a cactus wren here in Arizona. And, beautiful, but remember the magazine rules, fill the frame and all of that. Well, fill the frame and put it 6 feet high over this huge vaulted ceiling, and it's terrifying. It's like I have a dictator for a bird on the wall instead of a little tiny cactus wren. So this is not going to work. Not to mention the colors. It introduces a whole color we don't really see much of in the room. Maybe a little bit of green in the plants, but it's a lot of green showing up and it's not tied in well throughout the rest. So that's not going to work. Subject background separation. That is a huge rule in nature photography for our animals and birds. And this picture has it in spades. Definite subject background separation. But way too many bright colors to go in a room with these little pieces of decor. Even this neutral palette is completely conflicting with this bright palette. And I don't know about you, but I don't know of too many rooms that would have black and kind of yellowy orange and white and brown as the color palette, unless it's like Halloween, right? So this just doesn't work. So again, not going to sell. Filling the frame, again, this is such a common rule and we all do it. We all want to get closer. That's why we all own the long zooms if we're into wildlife. But this is terrifying on the wall of this room. So never going to do that on the wall. No one's going to buy that and put that on the wall. They'll ooh and ah over it, but they won't put it on the wall. And I clearly don't want a bear eating a bloody icky salmon over my bed. That is not the vibe I want in the bedroom. So not only does it not match, it doesn't match the vibe. And that's another thing people aren't thinking of, is what vibe is in that room. You know, most living rooms need a peaceful, serene sort of vibe. Offices might go for a little bit of energy, but they're still not going to want the lion killing the impala. I don't care how good the photo is, like that just isn't going to work on the wall in those spaces. But if you think how someone picks things to decorate a room, like go with your wives, gentlemen, and see what they'll pick out. They're looking for simple color palette, things to match. They're going to use color harmonies, perhaps, if they're familiar with those, or someone helping them will tell them to do that. And they definitely want to fit the vibe for the room. Your photograph has to convey what you want to evoke in that room. Do you want peaceful and serene? Do you want energetic? Do you want modern? What do you want? And it has to evoke that. And so even something as simple as, here's 4 sandhill cranes. This is an actual photograph. I have added a texture over it and it softened that palette. I also kind of minimalized the colors with a little bit of color grading. And that would look better. And I should have put the original in here too, but this definitely looks a little bit more peaceful, and it's like one step away from a real photograph as far as visually I'm talking about. And that can look quite nice in a room, just a little bit softer and tying in those colors. And even here's a diptych you could try by breaking it in 2, or even 1 if you wanted to do that. But those kinds of things work a little bit better in a living room than the right out of the camera, vibrant, tack sharp, all of that. It's just sometimes a little bit of the wrong thing in the right place. Here's another one. So this picture of cranes, just bringing a little bit of that warm peachy can kind of tie in with the wood here and the chair, and then the blue tones in the birds with the blue in the background. And I played with that a little bit. So I added a little more blue and warm so you get that color harmony to tie in with that room. In a wildlife competition, they don't want you to adjust much of color and things like that. I also got rid of some of these little grasses that were in the front. Before, in the raw version of this, there were all of these down here, and it kind of hijacked my eye, and I didn't want that. And the interesting thing is for photographs in competitions, you're not supposed to clone things out in most cases for a traditional wildlife or nature photography competition. If there's a stick, it needs to have the stick. If a feather's out of place, it needs to stay out of place. For a home, they don't care. They want something that looks beautiful, and it's maybe of the animal they love or the colors that they love. They don't care that I took out 7 pieces of grass in the front, or maybe, I don't know, there's a weed or something sticking out. Like, they don't care that I got rid of that. As long as it looks good, they don't care. Here's another one, high key, going over the room, the wall. And it looks beautiful in this room, tying in for the yellows, the beachy scene, and so forth. And again, this one. So it works really well in these environments. This is not high key, but it's a soft, simple palette that works really well in this room with wildflowers. And then I did a little painting in here. So it's a print, but then I also hand painted it in Photoshop to just kind of soften some of those edges a little bit and give it a little bit more of a painterly feel. And I also added a texture. And then the very last thing I want to tell you about tonight is a rule that I don't think we should ever break. It's really important, and that is ethics. So when we're photographing wildlife and nature, and I'm not going to get into it all tonight, but please, I encourage you to be ethical, period. Don't damage things. Don't get too close to birds in their nests. Don't make animals uncomfortable. They got a job to do. They have to feed themselves and make a living, and we can make that really hard on them. So don't pressure the wildlife when you're out there. Be careful, be ethical, all the things. If you want to learn more, NAMPA has a great list of ethics and things that you should consider when you're out in the field, and I'll direct you to nampa.org. And other than that, I am going to open it up for questions. If you want to take your phone and hover over the screen, you can instantly sign up for my newsletter. I don't spam. I don't even send things that often, but I let you know if I'm in the area. I let you know of things coming up in the future for workshops. It is your best bet to be able to get in on a workshop of mine because I rarely get to the point where I can advertise them to those not in the newsletter because they sell out so quickly. So if you want to get notified of exactly when they're going to be released down to the minute, so you can be on the computer, sign up, do that. I also have some other interesting things coming up, and I can't share a ton of details yet, but we're excited to announce some things that any of you can participate in, and that will be coming out in that newsletter as well. I think you're going to like it. So I'm going to stop sharing, take it back to you, and see if there's any questions. I see 2 have come up, and I'll give you a minute to ask some more. But do I always crop in a ratio? Gail, I don't always crop in a certain aspect ratio. Yes, there's the standard ones, but the print companies that I will use can do any custom size. And a lot of times when I'm working in interiors, I actually am doing very custom pieces. So I'm looking at a wall that's, I'm going to make something up 10 feet wide, and I am scaling how wide I want that image to go and how tall for that room. And it might be, I'm going to make something up, it might be 72 by 25. Well, if that's what it is, that's what I want. And then I'll order it accordingly. And then Hallie asked, are all those scenes in the rooms you showed clients of yours? Yes and no. The lawyer office, yes. The other ones, no. They're mock-ups and or I do have pictures that I'll ask clients to send me, but they are not photographers. And so the pictures show me where it lives. It does not do it in a beautiful way because they don't know what they're doing. The color is sometimes wrong. The exposure is wrong. I'll see, a sock in the corner, something silly that they probably don't want seen. So I don't use those in any of my presentations. I'll do mock-ups because it gives me an easier way to show you what I'm trying to explain. But great question. And those mock-ups are just done in Photoshop, nothing fancy. I license images from stock photography sites and then superimpose my image onto those homes or whatever the office might be. Yeah. All right. Other questions, comments? Was this helpful? Give me some feedback, you guys.
Well, I have a question. So when you sell your work,
Yes.
is it all custom, or do you present the work to people and they make a choice of what they
Yeah.
want?
Anymore, I have worked on a referral basis. I need to get my website in a better shape for selling, but I find I'm so picky that it ends up being a consultation, and then we're designing something. And using the most recent client, they wanted something Phoenix oriented. They had an office space they had just moved into, and they wanted something very carefully done. So I was color grading and matching for the office colors. I was sizing everything for the office, taking into consideration where these images were going to be in that office so I could understand what substrates to use. Did I want to print metal? Did I want to do a canvas or acrylic or whatever? And then taking into consideration what they were most passionate about. And then I went and custom shot things for them. So they wanted, this was one of a kind of situation. Um, and they were willing to pay that price. But I just find I have done better personally, and it's probably because it's all I've had the time for as well, but I get referrals and then I do very custom pieces. And then what I do is I present that. So I meet them, I go to the site, I measure everything, I take snapshots on my phone of what the site looks like, what face on, what walls, all the things, all the measurements, the colors, all of that. And then I go back to them either in person or remotely if they live far away. And I will do a custom presentation. So I show them the rooms. I show them the rooms, what the pictures would look like on them. I talk about the size and why, and what substrate we're going to use and why. And I put together basically the whole package, everything from soup to nuts, the prints, and what the installation costs are going to be, and go from there.
Okay. Somebody's asking, if the pictures that you're showing, are they on canvas or on metal or what?
It's a variety. So some of those pictures are just mock-ups, so you really can't tell the substrate, but I will print in what I feel is the best substrate or media for the situation. So I'm not like, oh, I always use Hanamule, blah, 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 or whatever paper. It is, where's it going to go? What does that situation need? And what is going to be best for that image? And a good simple example would be a metal print. I more often suggest metal for lobbies and offices because it's high traffic. People will touch things on occasion and you can Windex it, right? You literally can wipe it off and it's very easy to maintain. Just make sure you install it well. You don't want that falling on someone's head. Um, whereas a home, it might have more of a organic feel, right? Maybe a more woodsy feel where a canvas might be the way to go, or something with a wood background, not necessarily a wood frame, maybe. I don't love frames. I tend to be more of a frameless kind of person, but I will, in certain circumstances, do that. Is it in a kitchen or a dining room where it might get food spatters or oils? Or is it a family that has kids and their pets and they're going to be touching or there's going to be a lot of dander? How easy is it to clean? All those things go into the conversation. There's certainly some things I won't use and certainly some things I will. It just depends on the situation. Acrylic can be so easily scratched. So if you're going to use that, it better be in a place with minimal reflections and you want a lot of vibrant color versus if it's sitting in a sunroom, you don't want it to sun bleach over time. And yes, you can do all the museum quality inks and all of that, but let's face it, something in the sun eventually is going to degrade. So I think about that too. So I wish I could just say yes, it's one thing, but it's very much for the situation. It's like picking a restaurant to go out to. It's like, are you just starving? You want to grab a bite, or is this celebrating an anniversary? It totally dictates what restaurant you choose. And I'm much the same way. I want it to be just right for that client. Yeah.
So if your client is out of town, you ask them to photograph their room,
Yes,
look
straight
that
on.
way.
Yep, straight
Mhm.
on. And we get measurements that way. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, I see a couple I see a couple comments. I like to break the rules. Me too, Chuck. I see that. And then Judy said thank you and you're welcome. Janet asked, do you expose to the right for high key and to the left for low key? Typically, yes. I really wouldn't overexpose in a low key. It's usually underexposing or maybe at 0 if I'm using ambient light that's just right. Or I use off-camera flash to create that as well. It just depends on the situation. Off-camera flash, not for my wildlife, but more for equine and cowboys and things like that. And the rule for histograms is I hear most is exposed to the right. That is also true. Exposed to the right just means that you are lightening everything because there are more details in there. There's more data in there. If you literally put your camera on a tripod, whatever's in front of you, and you exposed at 0 and took that picture, and then you exposed to the right and took that picture and you downloaded them both onto your computer, the file where you exposed to the right, assuming everything is like in the mid-tone range, that exposed to the right is going to have more data. Where it won't is when you get into the really high key because you're losing data at that point. You're exposing to go pure white in a lot of your image. That's a little bit of a different animal. But it's nice to have a little brighter image because you can process it accordingly and you'll have more detail in your shadows and a little bit more quality in that image pound for pound. But there's a lot of exceptions to that. And so, yeah, and I think I just answered Janet's question as well. Anything else?
Do you normally work with a tripod when you're in the field?
It depends. It depends. If I'm in a place for a while and I'm photographing like birds in flight, like sandhill cranes, they fly all the time and you get really tired of hand holding, then I'll use a tripod. If I'm doing, something slow shutter, where I want to be a little more stable, or, photograph a landscape with, water coming in and out or a waterfall or something like that. Yes. My typical, a typical day, typical birds or wildlife or anything else, I'm shooting handheld in Alaska, which is where I do my most wildlife photography, I am handheld because we're in a boat a lot. But a monopod can sometimes help when the motor's off, and it just can help keep your camera closer to your face without you having to do this all the time, because the bears are constant, right? There is hardly a time where you're not able to photograph a bear, and you get really tired of being hunched and holding your camera like this. So having a monopod while you're sitting down and that's in front of you just keeps your camera closer to you and a little bit easier to access.
What about the danger factor when you're photographing bears?
You know, there's a danger factor in anything we do, but I try to mitigate that quite a bit. And I say anything we do, meaning anything any of us do anywhere, there's a danger. But where I take people for bears, most of the time we are in boats, and they're little boats, they're fishing boats. So you're right down low to the water. You don't need to get out of the water. I see some people like getting out of the water and shooting, with hip waders and chest waders. And I'm like, why? And I'm thinking what I do, we get into boats, you're very close to the water. And the bears, I go to Lake Clark National Park, and the bears there are very used to people, except there's not a lot of people at any given time, the places that I go. But they are used to people. We're very respectful of the bears, and they are so interested in salmon. They quite literally could care less about us. They might look at you and go, "Oh yeah, there's somebody," but they're literally, they could care less. We watch them, we watch their tells. We have, protective devices just in case. But I have never oh my gosh, I've been doing workshops in Alaska, I think since 2012. Never once had even a slightly scary situation. And I have been literally 5 feet from the bears. I'm not saying go walk up to a bear, but I'm saying when you follow certain protocols where you're standing in the open on land or on the water, the bears can see you. Cubs or no cubs, they see you. They have their own food already. We're going at times when the food is plentiful. They really don't care. That said, I wouldn't go hike down a trail by myself somewhere where bears aren't used to seeing people and run into a sow with cubs. I would lose my mind and probably my life, right? That's a very dangerous situation. But we're in very specific circumstances. I have a bear guide with us. We're in a boat. They can't easily get to the boat, but we're close enough to photograph them close up. I've never felt fearful at all. And I don't know that that's something you can understand until you're there and see it and experience it. But I've never felt fearful, not even a little bit.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to put in the chat for Dearborn's website in case you know of somebody who might be interested in becoming a member. Oh,
And hi, Karen.
okay, you put in something in the chat. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I just put the link. If somebody would rather use that link instead of the little QR code, I put the link to my website in there, and I see some familiar names in here. So good to see you, Karen and Barbara. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and everybody. I'm glad you could join us. And Lisa, as people have said, excellent presentation.
Thank you.
You are
Thank
quite
you.
the educator, I'd say, plus planner of workshops, as I said before. I highly recommend her workshops. And I'm
Thank
looking
you.
forward to hearing what your new thing is. that you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, I can't say a whole lot yet, but it's really cool. I am super excited about it. It's been a long time coming. We've been working hard on it. And so I hope to have more in our upcoming newsletter or letters about that. And yeah, and we also released our Magic of Cowboys in Montana. So we've always done it in Arizona. We did one in Montana. You go to my Facebook page or Instagram. And go check that out. I'm just Lisa Langell in either one. There's like two of us in the world, and the other one's a distant cousin, and she's a nurse, so you're not going to see photos there. But anyway, go check those out just for something new that we released. We've been working hard on it for a long time. Anybody that knows me knows I don't do cookie cutter workshops. I don't hire some third party outfitter and slap my name on it and go to Africa. Everything is carved out from scratch by me. It takes a long time, but as I've learned early on, when you go the extra mile, there are very few people there. So I like to live in that space and do unique things for you. So thanks for having me tonight, Karen. I really appreciate it. Everyone that came, appreciate you being here. I hope this was helpful.
Very much so. And we'd love to invite you again. You have a lot of different topics
We
that you
do.
teach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if any of you are joint members of other camera clubs, you can go to my website and there's the speaker request and you can automate everything. Pick your date, pick your time, pick your topic. It emails you. You don't have to wait for me to call you back. It's all automated, so you can get it done really quickly. And I can even help on short notice basis once in a while if you have a cancellation. So anyway, check that out as well for this year or next year. And have a wonderful holiday season, everybody.
And you too. And let's show our appreciation.
Thank
Okay.
you, Karen. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you,
And
everybody.
maybe we'll see some of you at the Jeff Shiwi presentation in a few weeks. So check our website for that. Thank you. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Karen, may I have a word?
Oh, sure. Oh, and I have to stop recording.